Data analysis donut is a weird, random phrase which got started because Sean Carter was leading the data analysis team, and we were using the Donut Slack plugin to coordinate random coffee chats. And we started having guests in to chat about whatever we wanted. And this is the first time we've done one in public. But I'm Toph. This is Geoffrey. Hi, Geoffrey.
Hey, great to be here.
Thanks so much for coming. I am a programmer here at Observable. I think I met Geoffrey in like 2016 or 17 or Cambridge or something in Cambridge, and stumbled into your PhD defense last year, where you talked about, among other things, Embark and Malleable software, which I think you're going to show us a bit of today. My one request to the audience is please ask questions after Geoffrey's demo in the chat. These things thrive on some audience participation. Geoffrey, who are you? What have you got?
Great. So Toph asked me to give a brief demo, so I'll keep it short and we'll have lots of time for discussion. So hi, everyone. My name is Geoffrey Litt. I'm a researcher at an independent research lab called Ink and Switch. And at Ink and Switch, we like to think about the future of tools for thought. How can we have computers be these really powerful tools that help us with our most important problems? And within that, we have a bunch of sub areas of research, but the one that I focus on is called Malleable software. And our goal there is, can we design software environments where every computer user can customize their tools in the moment to meet whatever their unique needs are? And part of our thesis there is that everyone's doing different stuff. Everyone has unique requirements, and we need software that's more malleable and lets you work with the workflows you want, rather than the software forcing you into some workflow that it wants. And as part of that, we've done a bunch of projects, but today I'm going to be focusing on one called Embark. It's a system that follows a philosophy that we call dynamic documents, and is focused on this specific use case of travel planning. And this is a project I did together with two collaborators, Paul Sonentag and Alex Obenauer. Okay, so what's the problem with travel planning? Well, we have all these great apps that we use for travel planning, right? Here are some of the apps I use to plan trips. I can find routes in Google Maps. I can take notes in Apple Notes about what we're going to do. I can look up the weather forecast for the weekend to think about when we should do stuff. I can use a calendar app to write down our itinerary. And in isolation, each of these apps is really powerful. They do great stuff. But the problem is they don't work together very well. So what I always end up with is a screen that looks kind of like this, with a bunch of windows. I'm juggling stuff manually. I'm digging around in my email to find the address of the place we're going and copy pasting it into Google Maps. And then when I do the directions again tomorrow, I have to go digging around in my email again, right? There's all these ways in which these apps don't know about each other. They lack shared context, and they force us as people to manually do the gluing. Now, one alternate vision that we find kind of loosely evocative is planning trips on paper. So let's say you're planning a trip on paper. You can throw a calendar down, some brochures, some Post-it notes, grab a cup of coffee. And there's something that feels different from apps here. Something about the fact that all of these different paper tools work together in one space together feels nice. The problem is, of course, paper is static. You can't, automatically look up a route on a paper map. So we asked ourselves, could we get the best of both of these two worlds? And that's what we tried to achieve with this tool called Embark. I'm going to show you very briefly just a few examples of what it feels like to use Embark. So here's Embark. This is a real document I made for going to a conference a couple months ago. And the starting point for Embark is you write down a little note, an outline about your trip. And you can just dump whatever information you want and think of it like an Apple Note or whatever your favorite note-taking tool is. So, for example, when I get the confirmation number for my hotel, I can just, write it down. Really critical here that this is a completely free-form medium where it's not requiring you to put the information in some specific format or do some complicated email forwarding thing. You just type what you have. The neat thing, though, is that we can start gradually infusing this note with computational behavior that lets you do stuff right from within the environment of this note without going to another app. So let's say I want to look up, how am I going to drive from my house to this conference? I don't need to copy paste stuff into Google Maps. I don't need to go to any other app. All I do is I start typing, hey, how do I drive from my house to the conference hotel? And boom, just like that, I get an autocomplete It shows me it's going to take an hour. It's 38 miles. I can even open up a map view right there. Now, how is that so fast? How is that so easy? Well, this note already had the context in it, right? It had my home address. It had the address of the conference hotel, which I had put in. And so it was able to use that existing context and feed it into this thing, what we call a formula. Think of it sort of like a spreadsheet formula that computed the driving directions and gave me this result. And then the map view is just another way of looking at that result. I can see it as text, 60 minutes, or I can also see the route as a map. Now, this same philosophy extends to lots of other formulas and computational behaviors that you use when you're traveling. So let's take another example. What's the weather going to be when I'm there? We do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to start typing weather and hit enter. And look at that. I got the weather for that day. I can do the same thing for Wednesday. Now check this out. We have two weather forecasts embedded in this note. And because I did the first one under the Tuesday bullet, it guessed that I meant weather on Tuesday at the conference. Same thing for Wednesday. So it was able to use that local context within that part of the document, right? And once again, just like the driving directions, we have weather forecasts directly embedded in our note. Now, I just want to mention a couple cool things here. So one, I didn't have to go to the weather app and look up some city or address. But two, the results are embedded in this note forever now. So whenever I come back to this travel plan, I have the forecast right there. I don't have to go look it up again. And because this is a dynamic document, the weather forecast is going to be automatically updating. So when I come back tomorrow, if the forecast has changed, I'll see that, right? So all of this is kind of blending some aspects that we really like of static notes, where you can just have everything in one place, with other aspects of computational tools and apps where we can have this really powerful dynamic behavior. So there's all sorts of other things you can do with these same building blocks. And the point here that I want to make is that what I just showed you is just the tip of the iceberg with what you can do with Embark. Embark is not an app like, a weather app or a routing app. It's a set of flexible building blocks where the goal is that you define the toolkit that makes sense for your trip. And out of these three kinds of building blocks, mentions of places and other things, formulas like driving directions and weather, and then these views like a map, you can compose them to do all sorts of other stuff. And I should mention, by the way, there's a lot of in each of these categories that I haven't shown. You can look up sunset times or parking availability with formulas. You can have other views like calendars. You can mention dates. So these are all kind of open-ended classes. I just wanted to show a couple cool ways that we were able to use Embark on the team. It just so happens that my two collaborators while we were working on this went on some pretty wild trips. Alex Obenauer went on a cross-country RV trip. And if you think about it, there's no app for planning RV travel, right? That's not a thing that's popular enough to have a completely dedicated set of apps. But Alex was able to reassemble the Embark primitives to do some really powerful stuff, like have these wish lists of places he might want to visit with custom icons on the map, have different colored routes, thinking through where he wanted to go. My other collaborator, Paul, also went on a wild trip. He went on this adventure rally across Europe, and he and his brothers used Embark to think through these color-coded categories of points and computed tons of driving routes to think about where they wanted to visit on their way. So that's all I'm going to show today. I know that was a super brief demo. If you'd like to learn more about Embark, we're about to have a conversation here, and then there's also this essay on the web where you can see a lot more details about how Embark works, more demos of using it, more reflections on it. But yeah, that's my demo of Embark.
I love it. I love it. Very cool. And I like you have your shout out to Andy in there that, what is it, like prototypes demand real use contexts? What's the line?
Authentic context of serious use. Yeah, that's a line that Andy Matuszak, a phrase that Andy Matuszak coined, I think. And we got a lot of mileage out of that on this project. Actually, one of our early prototypes looked really cool. Yeah, mileage. The basic philosophy, I'll back up and explain, is that if you're trying to build a good tool, you should actually use it for something real. And if you don't use something real, you're not going to end up with a thing that actually works well. I think in product development, this is sort of taken for granted, but in more speculative research, it can be a little harder to figure out the balance. In some of our past work, we found that the results seemed cool and people liked it, but we wouldn't come back and keep using it, and we were kind of dissatisfied with that. On Embark, we went on a lot of trips and iterated a lot on the design through actually traveling. We planned our labs in-person get-together in it, and all these various trips that I showed. And so that was a really cool force to have acting on the design.
Yeah, dog fooding. I feel like some coworker, I don't know, people also talk about dog fooding as like, if the metaphor is if you're manufacturing dog food, you should eat your own dog food, which raises some very interesting questions like, am I a dog? Like, are we not ourselves the users of it or whatever? It can be like either pejorative or, it's
a weird metaphor. I think it's it's a weird metaphor. I think it's a bit confusing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard drinking your own champagne as another way of putting it.
Oh, I don't like that either. I think that raises whole different problems. Then you're getting high off your own supply. So for every idiom, there's an equal and opposite idiom. But effective system design requires insights drawn from serious contexts of use. I think we should just say that full phrase whenever we want to refer to this. I mean, at Observable, we use Observable a lot, and certainly Observable is better when we use it and worse when we don't, and better in the ways that we use it. And, we've used Observable notebooks I used several notebooks for like planning my wedding last year. We use it for planning, meetings and like rotations and agendas and pulling in stuff from the GitHub API and calendar and whatever. And it works when you are so immersed in the notebook medium that you think to reach for that first, and when you're comfortable enough with it, that you've gotten over the hump of how do I ever do something in this. But it feels like it can be a rarefied area to be in. Like I would not, if someone on the street were like, how should I plan my wedding? I would not honestly recommend an Observable notebook.
Right.
And we've also struggled with, for many years, notebooks were our only product. And now, as people have been showing and you've been hearing about, there's this Observable framework, static site generator, that bakes out something that is less about, notebooks have this sort of end user programming ethos where there's not a sharp distinction between a viewer and an editor. If you land on a notebook, you are empowered to change any value of any cell and start moving. And like, those are not two personas. It's like one person made in the image of God with the full range of human expressiveness at their fingertips. But then people are like, what are all these buttons for? Like, I'm just trying to get driving directions to the store or something. Like, why do I have this like abstract function syntax? And it can feel like, so I guess there are the problems that it either feels like a toy for the end user or like a gimmick or something, or just that it's inaccessible. So do you feel like you've succeeded in like getting over that hump for yourself, where now you will reach for Embark?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. I think this is something we think a lot about. I think philosophically speaking, there's sort of two different ways to think about what software should be. One is the app mentality, which is there's some designers out there who picked a problem space like wedding planning or planning a trip, or
there are by the way, there are RV trip planning apps. There's RV Trip Wizard, RV Parky, Campendium, Gas Buddy.
I should have spoken more carefully when I said there weren't any. Yeah, so I'll get to that though. So you can have an app for everything, right? And indeed, sometimes there are really niche apps. The problem is each app, you have to go find it and you have to learn it. And each app has its own set of metaphors and its own ways in which it satisfies or doesn't satisfy some box that some designer thought of as the problem space. And every app, if everyone who's in product development knows, you have to be cutting scope constantly and thinking about, things like, oh, well, that's only 5% of our users, so we're not going to do that feature, or, things like this. So that's the app mentality. And I think that's sort of the dominant mentality we tend to think about today. And the other mentality is something more like an open-ended medium, a flexible set of recombinable building blocks that you can use to do whatever you want. I think the spreadsheet is the archetypal example that probably most people are familiar with, but I think observable notebooks are another great example. These are open-ended tools that often start by being focused on one particular zone. So maybe with spreadsheets, it was accounting, and with observable data analysis. But it turns out that they're flexible enough that they can generalize. And I think generality, I think, is the really key property that gets you a lot of good stuff. Generality means that it's worth learning the tool, because once you learn it, it was worth it because you can use it for everything, kind of like you were saying with observable. It rewards the investment. I think a lot of people feel this with, if you're a programmer, you might have a text editor that you love, and you can use the text editor to edit all sorts of stuff, and that's why it's worth it. If you cook, knowing how to use a kitchen knife is really useful because you can cut anything with a kitchen knife. There's all these examples, and a kitchen knife is more useful to learn than an avocado peeler or whatever, or an avocado slicer, right? So I think generality,
also like more associated with mastery or something. Like there are virtuosos of using the general purpose knife. I think my brother-in-law like took a class in chopping maybe it was Danny. But it's like, I feel like, and then when you get these like very tailored sort of gimmicky things, it feels like a toy. It feels brittle and like a child's plaything. Like, and now I'm only going to cut avocados. And if you then talk to someone who is employed to cut avocados every day, like they would not be using that. They would be using the general tool.
Exactly. Single purpose tools often don't reward mastery, I think. And I will point out, though, I think getting back to your original question, this question of how do you get people to the point where they're fluent in the medium and feel comfortable with it is really hard. I wouldn't say we've cracked that with Embark. With Embark, we've gotten to the point where we enjoy planning trips with it, which you could say, and obviously from the standards of product development, is a low bar. I think it was pretty hard even to get there. And then there's a whole, if we were to make this thing more, friendly to learn, I think we have a lot of ideas around things like templates. Like, here's a way that makes this open-ended medium feel a little more like an app at first, where, it's like a pre-baked configuration of the thing towards a particular task. But then after you've used 3 templates, you might start noticing, oh, wait, this is just all the same thing under the hood.
Yeah, so malleable software wins when the ergonomics of generality, the predictability it offers the user, starts to win out over the specialized tailoring that dedicated apps can offer. Like a person should feel frustrated, like Chrome has tabs, but the iPhone Google Maps app does not have tabs. And like, why can't I use the same principles of tab organization in this app? And if you feel frustrated enough by that, then the general solutions will win out.
I think those are good dimensions. Another one that I think a lot about is like malleable software wins when different users are more different.
Yeah.
So
Fahrenheit
when
versus
you're traveling,
Celsius.
You're gonna have to explain that.
I was noticing when I was reading the paper, you were like, this user might want their temperature in Fahrenheit, and this user might want it in Celsius. And I was thinking, thank God for these examples of like really robust user preferences, because it makes malleable software more compelling. And if there was something where,
I think that one's a pretty simple setting that a lot of apps have. It's true. It's a very strong preference.
Too simple to really argue in favor of malleable software. But then when you have there's an amazing book, Capitalism and Arithmetic, about the spread of the Hindu-Arabic numerals in Venice in 1400 or whatever. And one point it made is that the handwritten arithmetic was partly powerful because the Roman Empire had collapsed, and there was such a proliferation of different currencies that people were constantly doing different like currency conversions, which required this virtualization of the currency into an abstract symbolic system.
Whoa. Yeah, I definitely think what's interesting about what we found interesting about travel is, in some sense, it's a well-scoped domain, but there are so many different kinds of trips. Like a one-day business trip to a conference and a 2-week honeymoon are not remotely the same in most ways. And so it's a really natural domain, I think, for thinking about how different people have different needs.
Yeah. Should we look at some of the questions in the app? Let's see. Okay, Simon Willison asks a good. Oh yeah, look, now it's readable for everyone. Simon wins the race to bring up AI. Actually, no, Angie brought up AI a minute sooner, but Simon asks, Claude Artifact seems to have blown the potential for malleable software right open in the past few months, and it's being cloned all over the place. Are you exploring having LLMs directly write HTML and CSS and JavaScript in Embark yet?
Yeah, great question. So I'm really excited about the potential of LLMs and code generation to support the vision of malleable software. I've been really surprised by the pace of progress there. We've done a couple experiments here. So yes is the simple answer to your question. We are exploring that. One thing that, one limitation of Embark as we prototyped it is that these views like map or calendar were sort of baked in a sense. There was a finite set of views, and like, sure, you could technically program a new view, but that would require like cloning a repo and being a programmer and designing some new UI. And so something we are actively exploring is, could you in the moment think of a new type of view you want for your trip, like make me a table summarizing each day with these particular columns, and then have that UI be generated on the fly. And I'll also note that sometimes people ask us, like, are you going to release Embark as a product? And our answer is no, because Embark actually isn't just a travel planning product. It's like a sketch of a broader, more general system around these ideas of mentions and formulas and views stitched together to do all kinds of tasks. And so we're doing a lot of exploration of AI generated tools in that broader context. Another quick thing I'll throw in is that this idea of shared context in Embark documents, I think, is a really good fit for a lot of AI use cases. We've done some experiments with Embark documents where you have AI help you write formulas and do other stuff like parse unstructured data from emails into your Embark document. And all of these use cases really benefit from the fact that you have this one place where you've written down everything about your trip. That's like a gold mine for an AI, because it has all the useful context relevant to one thing. And often today, in the status quo is that sort of context tends to be spread across many different apps. And so people have to do all these really complicated things to ingest all that context into one place. So it helps a lot if a person collates that context together.
Mm-hmm. But they have to choose to do it all in one place. Like, they could be doing all the context in Apple Notes or something. Like, for it all to exist in one place requires a totalitarian embrace of Embark for all their, if their friends are sending them iMessages, like someone sends a screenshot, like, are they going to be collating that themselves and making sure it's all in the legible substrate?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think we're big believers in integrating with existing data sources and acknowledging the fact that stuff lives in different places too. I still think, though, it is a lot of the inherent value of these kinds of substrates comes from the fact that you don't have a million apps and you have one place where you're collecting stuff, and a bunch of capabilities can coexist there. So yeah, I think to some extent, I don't care if it's like our specific app, or if I don't even know if we'll release one or a research lab, but the point is more like when people collect context from a bunch of different types of media and types of applications, and they say, no, this is all related to one project, I'm going to put it in one place. That's a really powerful pattern.
Yeah. It feels like some of the scope limits you imposed on yourselves in the paper, like you say, we decided to keep principled handling of data schemas out of scope for this project, and you just give everything the same schema, which sort of matches up well with what AI magic wand stuff could do. As like, so you take Embark and then you throw in this like magic wand translating among any schema.
Yeah, data schema translation is one of the most it's one of the tasks that I've had the most success with using current LLMs. They tend to be really good at that task. And so I think it's like you say, it's a perfect fit.
Okay, how do we get Omar's comment on screen? I think Hannah or Chris is maybe watching this, and boom, they can click the button. Okay, Celsius and Fahrenheit is interesting because I often want both. And this is an underlying problem with settings. It assumes you're a unitary person with unitary preferences, one or the other, that you can just fix into the software.
Yeah.
That's sort of similar to, you have some examples in the paper of like different people on the trip might want different views of the same underlying data. And it's not like, and I might want to see everyone's views. It's not a match for like just personalization to the user account you're logged in with. It's about being able to iterate over something and see, like part of the I feel like so much of the malleability I want is just like showing me different things next to each other. Like, what do I see? What does my wife see? Like, I'm setting out, do you see what I see in the Christmas spirit?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think we grapple a lot with this question of often you have personal preferences, but also you're working together with other people. You want to look at the same thing. And there's a tension there. Do you show each person the thing they want to see, or do you see a shared reality? That can be pretty confusing. In Embark, I can speak to how we dealt with this in Embark, which I feel fairly satisfied with, which is that these settings like Fahrenheit and Celsius, they're in their own Embark document. That's sort of like your personal settings document. And then whenever you run these Embark documents, they sort of live in this context where your settings document is like their parent, so to speak, and they live in this context. So you can sort of override various settings just by editing a document. So everything's just documents all the way down. It doesn't really address your point about wanting to see both. We have some very early experiments we haven't shared yet around like UIs where every value can be multiple values, but maybe we'll share some stuff about that soon. But I think that might speak to your question. Yeah.
I feel like one of the most common ways I try to like break out of Google Maps, if I'm driving somewhere with Google Maps, I very often open Apple Maps on the side just to be able to look up like a gas station or a restaurant or something without breaking myself out of like directions mode in Google Maps. And I'm like, well, I'm glad Google Maps has a competitor so that I can get two map views at the same time on my phone.
Something I didn't show in Embark is that we do have a sort of tabs type thing where you can open multiple windows and do stuff side by side, which is, I've noticed the same pattern actually. Like browser-based apps have a huge advantage from the ability to open multiple copies of the app in different tabs.
Yeah.
Then
you can't like overlay them. You can't work with the content on both tabs in a principled way.
Side by side is the dumbest form of composition. In some sense, every time you put two windows next to each other on your desktop, you are making custom software, right? It's just that it's really dumb. Those two windows have a really limited way of talking to each other. And so a lot of what Embark is about is, can we have a little bit of a richer underlying infrastructure so that things that are side by side know more about the data that's in one another. The map knows what locations you're looking at on your web browser. Your weather app knows what you're looking at on your map, and everything talks together a little more.
Mm-hmm. I think we are now 1 minute over time. If you spot any other, we have had a lot of good questions in the chat. Can't get to all of them, but I do have one more question. In the paper, you say when you were actually using Embark on your road trips, we found it to be a valuable planning companion. Although we had many usability issues because Embark is a rapidly developed research prototype. Were there any times, come on, give me a little more color here. Were there times when you were like shaking your fists in preparation? It should get you like to
so
really
many,
use
so
Embark
many.
in a serious context. You should get like pulled over. You should get arrested while using Embark, and then when you're really under
where
the
do
gun.
you even begin? It's funny. Like we didn't put a link to the demo in the essay. We've been giving it out when people ask for it, and the reason is just that we had to cut these research projects. We're trying to break new ground and think of new interaction patterns, but we only have a few people for a few months. Is the way we run stuff, and so we have to cut corners somewhere. And so what we decided on this one was we're going to use a lot ourselves, and we're going to live with some usability problems, which include like losing data from time to time, crashing a lot, things glitching all the time. And those are things that you can learn to work around if you're a super pro user. They're not things that would be acceptable in a product that shipped, but they're corners we were willing to cut to focus on the essential ideas. So nothing really interesting there. Just a lot of pain.
You didn't
there's
get
no bubble app.
lost.
I never got lost, no, but I was like opening my laptop up at the rest stop, connecting to Wi-Fi to like look at my plan, because we didn't have time for a mobile app. Right? There's a the path from prototype to a really truly usable thing is very long.
Ain't it the truth? All right, long live the road trip. Love road trips.
Indeed.
My friend Joe has been talking about, everyone's got to get their road trips in now before self-driving cars make it a dying art. So get on the road.
Yeah, enjoy the driving while it lasts.
That's my lesson. Life is a highway.
Totally.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Geoffrey. We could
Thanks for having me.
talk for 24 hours straight, but this is our slot. And thanks everyone for leaving comments in the chat. And yeah, the link someone just helpfully added to the chat is incanSwitch.com/embark.